Hi, my name is Palesa Madumo, convener of the PRISM Awards, Africa's most sought-after public relations awards. I am also your host for a special 10-part series brought to you by the PRISM Awards and PRISA. I'll be talking to industry thought leaders, talking great campaigns, sharing important insights, and discussing, quite honestly, what is and isn't working in our industry. Follow at the PRISM Awards on Twitter. Send your questions and comments, and you can tag me and my guest as well. So today I'm chatting to self-starter, straight talker, Mr. Tom Manners, co-chief executive officer of Clockwork, a digital agency based in Johannesburg that describes itself as the creator of brand stories, collaborators, and conversation starters, which I think sets the perfect tone for our conversation today. Tom, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So you were a journalist for one of South Africa's biggest tech publications right early on in your journey in this industry. Sum up your view of the digital divide in South Africa.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the digital divide is maybe a misnomer because it's less of a divide now than maybe like a crack in the floor that we can easily step over. I think, back when I was a tech journalist at my broadband, we used to regularly write reports on internet penetration in South Africa and social media subscriber bases and stuff like that. And I initially remember writing on the fact that Twitter had 500,000 subscribers in this country, which was like a big deal, and we got to start advertising on Twitter and whatnot. And I looked at the stats this morning, and I mean, it's a completely different story. Although we aren't the most internet connected population in Africa, countries like Kenya are at 87% digital internet penetration, for example, we're still doing incredibly well. And I think the opportunities for communicators that have been presented by the sort of the genesis of the internet on the continent, and then subsequently in developed countries like South Africa, the growth across our population and access to digital platforms is tremendous and has completely changed our industry. It's been a very exciting time to live through.
Absolutely, and I love the fact that you've actually walked this journey with these particular stats. But even when we look at it now, only about 37% of South Africans are using just social media, for example.
Correct. Yeah.
So what I wanted to know is how impactful are digital campaigns, considering that there's such a small population that's actually exposed to them?
Yeah, so I mean, if you were to compare how marketers look at developed economies like the United States or the UK, for example, and we do a lot of work in those countries, it is easier to communicate because the full population base almost is on social platforms like Facebook or Twitter. It's still growing and evolving in this country, and more people are moving over to platforms. And we have to remember as well that social media and social platforms are an evolving thing as well. So it's not like we can just simply say, okay, well, 37% of our population is now on Facebook, or 100% job done, because by then it would have moved on and we'll have TikTok or whatever the next iteration of the big social platform in 10 years is going to be. So I think it's a job, but it's also exciting because while, for example, the United States has such a high internet penetration and such a high penetration of individuals on social media, the changes that take place there are much less seismic and far slower, for marketers and the opportunities that present themselves as well. And for us, it's when you start getting stuff like TikTok, for example, where people are just flocking to it, you start seeing this leapfrogging motion.
Absolutely.
A lot like what happened with the internet in South Africa back with mobile phones. So we're really leapfrogging, and we're kind of moving ahead of some developed economies like the US and the UK in terms of penetration and uptake of new social platforms and new technologies. And so there's a lot to stay on top of for marketers and communicators, but there's a lot of opportunity to keep things fresh. And especially if you're working on sort of like broad reach consumer brands, Netflix or banks, financial institutions, whatever. There's always something to explore, and that's been tremendously exciting for us, I think, in the last couple of years. And it's really starting, the fruit is starting to ripen, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Now we have enough of of a sort of a mass to really work with,
Yes.
that the results are starting to show for
Yeah,
themselves, which is
yeah.
great. Yeah.
No, totally. I think a lot of people will often hear when they hear Kenya statistics, for example, will often say, well, what happened to South Africa? You know, we were leading the way at some point, charting the future of of internet use, etc. I think the reason why I wanted to delve into that conversation is to talk about sort of that consumer that's left out of the conversation and
Yeah.
how you actually deal with that. In fact, what I really want to know is, considering that, you know, so few people are on social media, how do you, let's say this person gets a brand new phone tomorrow for the first time in their lives and connected to Wi-Fi for the first time, maybe they're journeying from a small township or a rural area in KZN and end up at Wits University, and suddenly they're on, you know. Firstly, how do you find them? How do you know they exist? And, you know, how do you then start sharing important information with them, or campaigns that are interesting to them?
Yeah. Again, a really good question. I think, you know, fortunately the platforms like Facebook do a lot of the job for us. You know? So it's in Facebook's own interest to ensure that people are coming onto the platform. And I'm using Facebook as a catch-all for social media here.
Sure.
You know, that they're coming onto the platform, that they are being allocated to the right demographics, and then obviously being pushed through to the advertising platform that we use and the organic platform that we use. That being said, though, I mean, obviously there's a user journey. Like, you know, social media is just one thing. And if you were to talk about someone from a rural village in the Eastern Cape, for example, or KZN, you know, coming to Wits or whatever it happens to be, you know, often their journey is going to start with what they know.
Sure.
You know, so it starts with sort of like base platforms like USSD, browser-based stuff as well, for example, that then subsequently leads on. But, you know, what I would say is that I think those statistics are slightly misleading. Because although, say, 37% of South Africans are on social media, and let's call that a statistic, I guarantee you that 80–90% of South Africans know what social media is.
Sure.
You know, so it's not this new, it might be a new experience for them, but the concept of a social platform is not new. You know, it's 2021 now, and so
No, sure.
you know, word moves fast. So
Absolutely.
I think you know, they're hungry to get onto it. There's a whole other conversation as to why they don't have the same internet access as Kenya, for example, and that becomes a government thing, to be honest with you. But I think they're raring to go. You know, it's like everyone's at the gates knocking, which is exciting. Yeah.
I think for me, it's more the sort of exclusion that might then, or that does happen then. And I think it's something for our industry to really think about. As you say, there's a limit to what we can do as communicators, but I do think that that's something we need to tackle as well.
Yeah.
So speaking of social media, there is this hashtag cancel culture, and it is really gaining momentum. Certainly over lockdown, we saw a lot of that sort of exposés and hashtag cancel this one or the other. What are your thoughts on cancel culture?
I think cancel culture is an expression of the identity politics that's taken hold of the world in the last 10 years. And I mean, identity politics, as we know it today, really has been bred out of access to unfiltered information. And so, you know, what we used to have was a sort of journalist or media body that would pass through information that was shared to them or information that they had access to and would objectively look at it. We know that wasn't always the case, but it would always go through this filter. And so what people regarded on newspapers and, you know, the radio and television, or what they saw, they would regard as truth and take it for truth.
Yes, absolutely.
And unfortunately, you know, across the world and particularly in South Africa, we have a situation now where critical thinking is not a skill that's developed in our schools, and we also have access to unfiltered information on the internet. And so we begin to sort of formulate ideas and opinions about things as a result of what we're seeing out there, and we're seeing a lot of information. So it's a bit of a roundabout way of answering your question, because I think cancel culture is one of the symptoms of the identity politics that we see today. And, you know, we see the right and the left so far apart. I mean, the United States is a great example again. Further apart than they've ever been since the 1920s. And so, you know, the line in the middle where people can have a civil conversation and agree to disagree about things is really become quite blurred. So on the cancel culture thing, I think we're also living through a period in time where poor behavior, sexist, racist behavior is having a light strongly shone on it. So it's just something I don't think anyone in their right mind can disagree with.
Sure.
The same reality I just spoke about, which is access to information, has also given way to seeing more, or rather sort of emerging more information about the kind of behavior I was talking about. Or, like police brutality, for example, around the world, racism around the world. And it's changing people's opinions. But unfortunately, when you meld the two, what you tend to find is that you've got identity politics on top of the sort of seismic shift in culture, and then it becomes cancel culture.
Totally.
Which can become, it's progressive and it's positive, I think, when executed in the right way. And I always believe, and I mean, really kind of like thoroughly argue for on public platforms, a moderate approach to outing people. I think there's a lot of bad people in the world.
And I think it's tough. I think it's very tough to even think about a moderate approach to that kind of thing, because it's so instant.
Yeah.
And like you say, once one person has a bite, the whole population on social media then goes for that person. And I was interested to know, I don't know if you've ever dealt with a brand that's been cancelled or a personality that's been cancelled, and that bounce back, if possible. There's also a layer of favoritism depending on which DJ is more liked than another, or which personality is more liked than another. And I think, how does that filter into the process as communication people? How do we deal with that type of challenge?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. I was actually kind of reflecting on this today. Our approach to a brand or an individual being cancelled in, say, 2017, 2018, when this, when it was really at its peak, when it was kind of like to be honest with you, a public lynch mob.
Yes.
It was, admit fault, be quiet. Don't try and fight the tide. I think now, truthfulness and, and openness always win the day. It might not be right in the beginning, but if a brand or an individual truly is innocent, then I believe that they should stand up for what the truth is and speak to that, but not try and fight what's going on.
Sure.
You can't fight every, God forbid, penny sparrow on the internet, you know what I mean? Or the other way around. Like, there are awful people out there, keyboard warriors sitting behind their PC.
Course.
Let them have their day. The conversation will die down. If there's truth to it, then unfortunately that needs to be looked at, and you need to deal with the consequences. And we're seeing that today with a couple of individuals, DJs and whatnot, that you mentioned. But there's also been a number of situations when people have been unfairly accused of something, and it's ruined their lives.
Absolutely.
So it has to be treated so carefully.
It does, especially because this is the future of communication. Like, it's going to be rarer and rarer to be able to sit down with someone and have a wholesome debate about something. So
Absolutely.
we need to figure out how we're gonna manage that.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's not a popular opinion to sit here and say that I don't agree with the way that cancel culture presents itself on the internet.
No, it's not popular at all.
But I do believe that.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a lynch mob than a jury. And I think everyone has a responsibility, if they're going to be given a platform, to consider how they're presenting their opinions out in the world, and how critically they've thought of the issue.
Absolutely.
Before just spewing their opinion onto Twitter, for example. But it's a useful tool when people are truly guilty. It just has to be managed somehow. It's such a difficult grey area, though.
It is. And let's talk about Black Twitter, for example. Black Twitter is a brand on its own. It's a movement that has formed a very strong identity. We all know, I'm sure you'll get into it, but we all know what it's about, essentially. It's about socio-political issues and addressing them in a way that actually navigates towards some change, I wanted to find out from you, what is the perfect balance between consciousness, because particularly in South Africa, that's something that every brand manager, brand owner should have on their mind all the time. You should always be conscious of the environment you're working in. And digital prowess, because that also says, okay, here's how you handle digital. So what's the perfect balance, and is there?
I don't think there is a perfect balance. I think it changes for each brand. I think it changes depending on the time of day. You know, it depends. And, you know, Black Twitter, as you said, you know, it's kind of like, again, a phrase we use to describe a portion of the Twitter population in South Africa. And, you know, I think it's an amazing thing. I think it's incredibly funny, to be honest with you.
Yes.
I think the way they navigate GIF libraries is like mind-blowing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a difficult, you know, it's linked to what we were just speaking about, like the cancel culture thing. Not that Black Twitter is cancel culture, it's not, but it's about how to plug into the zeitgeist of what's going on in the world or in South Africa or in a particular group of people, and then whether or not a brand deserves or should have a position on that issue. And I think, you know, we need to kind of like zoom out and focus less on Black Twitter and focus more on just social, political or social issues, and whether brands or individuals, you know, how they should stand on that. I mean, a lot of our clients ask this question, and it's to say, you know, where should we take a stance on this? And I always say, you know, well, you know, we have to, because now, you know, people are looking towards brands and not the government or governments as a source of trust and a source of, you know, truth, to be honest with you, in the world. And brands are stronger than they've ever been in the history of humanity at the moment. And so, you know, when you have Nike backing Colin Kaepernick, for example, or the Black Lives Matter movement, it means something.
It does.
I think that brands should stand for something, but that it shouldn't be lip service because they want to promote the brand.
Absolutely.
It needs to be because they believe it and they live it. And then, you know, I often say to our clients that if you truly live this thing, if you live gender equality, if you live, you know, Black Lives Matter, for example, and support it, or you live an anti-racist standpoint or position, then this is an easy thing because it's the truth, it's the core of your business. But then you need to kind of go out there and take a stand. And you know, the thing about Nike was, you know, when they did the whole Black Lives Matter, I mean, they'd been doing this for years, but the BLM thing, there was massive backlash against them. Millions of people started burning Nikes like Republican Americans, extremists. And, you know, you got to accept that if you truly believe in something and you stand on the right side of history, not everyone's going to agree with you. And like that might hurt sales in the short term, but in the long term, you're living your brand identity, you're living what you believe in, and you're standing with a part of the population that you believe kind of aligns to your customer base. So, you know, I think the parallel between what I've just been speaking about and kind of like working within and with Black Twitter, as we put it, it's quite close, because, you know, I think if South African brands present themselves as a supporter of whatever Black Twitter is talking about at a particular time, but then doesn't live that truth, or something emerges that is counter to that, then you're in trouble.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, it is that vacuum, you know, from a government perspective, sort of not being able to deal with social issues, political issues, where Black Twitter has then found a voice and has then become a brand on its own, which I think is quite important work that needs to be done. But I think you're right in the sense that when it comes to our industry and how we deal with it, we've got to be it's got to be based on truth. It's got to be based on, you know, it's not about spin, it's not about, oh, what color is this, or, you know, what picture are we going to use to support this movement. It's very much about, do you understand the social issues in which you function as a brand, and you know, what are you truly about? Because I do believe that if you do get questioned by, for example, a very strong brand like Black Twitter, you should be able to, you know, shine your credentials if that's what you're about.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a welcomed, you know, part of what we do. But to your point, clients need to understand it a lot more and not just ask because they're scared.
Yeah. Look, I think the point you made about spin and truth is really quite critical. And I recently took one of our clients through this sort of a PR 101 approach, which was basically explaining where PR came from.
Yes.
And there's a big shift that happened in the last 10 years. PR is associated with the idea of spin.
Yes.
And and that kind of implies it's the version of the truth that we want you to believe, right? And the reason for that is because, you know, the only way that brands could communicate was through the media.
Yes.
You know, it's a very closed system. Now it's a completely different world. So we no longer get to apply the version of truth that we want you to believe as a brand. We only get to apply the version of truth that is the truth.
That exists, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so Black Twitter stands as a foil for that. It's like a mirror. You know,
True.
like you can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah.
You have to actually live your values.
Absolutely, absolutely. So your agency Clockwork has Netflix as a client, and it was very interesting when you had this brief land on your table to launch one of Netflix's most successful series last year, Blood and Water, literally 5 minutes before lockdown, level 5.
Yeah.
I think the industry has spoken quite, has spoken a lot about the challenges of lockdown.
Yeah.
What I wanted to know was, if you minus the air kisses, the champagne, and the red carpet, what were some of the positive experiences and some of the opportunities that came out of that?
Yeah, so it was an interesting one because we were planning for a red carpet release,
of course.
and then I think we had the premiere in May or late April, so 10 days before level 5. And you'll remember level 5 meant you could not leave your house.
Literally, it's not like now.
Yeah,
I
like
think
you
we've
could not leave your
forgotten
house.
now.
You couldn't go to a shop and buy a ring light.
Yeah.
You know, it was an issue. So I think we've always been quite an agile agency, and I believe that a lot of agencies in South Africa are, specifically the independents, because they're often owner managed and they can make decisions on the fly. And that creativity and agility and the mixture of the two kind of came through on that. And I think that was what made that campaign so successful. And so we partnered with Eclipse, who worked on the publicity, and we put the production together and made it all happen. And very quickly kind of cobbled together this launch, which was actually, I believe, the first virtual launch in the country that had happened. And what was so cool about it is that it fast forwarded what would have taken a client or any client 3 years to probably get to. And now everyone's doing it. Like, this is just what we do now, virtual launches.
Yeah.
But it was really challenging, but quite gripping and exciting to be faced with such a massive difficulty, which is the logistical difficulty of lockdown level 5, and then having to kind of make what we called after school special happen. And I mean, we had Nasty C perform, and we had influencers interviewing people over Zoom when people were trying to figure out what Zoom was. So yeah,
it was still then when Zoom meetings weren't actually that popular.
Yeah. But I mean, as a more sort of general thing, what I've loved so much about, and you'll probably look at me funny for saying I've loved the last year, and it's been challenging. Don't get me wrong, it's been really hard. But the thing I've loved about last year is the fact that, we're very fortunate to work with many brands that are big global brands, and if you've worked with brands like that, you'll know that things tend to move very slowly.
Yes.
And we all kind of defer back to the comfortable way of doing something, because it's easy to get through 9 layers of approval.
Yes.
And last year just forced us to chuck those 9 layers out and just go for things. And Netflix is...
And force the client, most importantly, because we always want to check that out.
And the nice thing about Netflix is that as a brand, culturally, they're very similar to us. Or like an independent agency. It's a very sort of flat decision layer. And so we were making decisions as quickly as each other and moving.
Great.
And there's a lot of learnings and a lot of experience that came out of that we've subsequently taken to some of our more traditional clients and said, guys, this is the new way of doing things now.
Exactly.
We got to move quickly.
Yeah.
So it was great. Yeah, really enjoyed that one.
Awesome, and well done on that. I think it was fabulous.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get a little bit more intimate now in terms of our industry. You and I will know that anytime you come across a PR person or advertising person or anyone within the marketing industry, they've always got something to say about our industry and how it should be better, particularly in South Africa, that is, and how it should be better run. These improvements need to be made there. But I also often find that in our complacency, we look outside of ourselves, for the solutions. What are your thoughts on that? And, what do you think we should actually be doing besides complaining?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So I mean, there's a lot of things that can always be better about an industry. I think The first one I want to start with is transformation, because I think it's the hardest one to talk about. And like I have some unpopular opinions about that, which I'll share. Because I kind of believe that the rules and regulations by which agencies have to abide by don't necessarily solve the problem. And the problem, in my opinion, is opportunity, true opportunity. So, for me, it's been so inspiring to see people like yourself and Monalisa at Riverbed and the guys at Avatar take the bull by the horns and just run, and do so exquisitely, and to be the top of their industry, an odd number as well, the absolute top of their game. And that shows me that when people are given an opportunity that they might not have had before to create something of their own, and be given a strong foundation from which to build an agency in their own image, and an agency that they believe in, amazing things happen. What I sometimes am concerned about is, within the codes that we work with, this idea of simply handing over equity as a solution for everything. I don't necessarily believe that that's going to solve the problem. I think we need to be going out there and building businesses from scratch. That being said, though, on the BEE side, I truly believe that supplier development, enterprise development, the internship programs that come out of it are really making a difference, because we're able to bring in young individuals that are passionate about the work that they do, upskill them, and then give them a place to work and gain experience. And again, that comes to my original point. It's about opportunity.
It connects the person with something to do or something they can build on.
Exactly.
But having said that, you sort of say handing over equity. But if you give someone ownership, do you not think that creates opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there's meaningful ownership transfer, and then there's ownership transfer. And again, I'm going to be unpopular here, but a lot of the larger agencies, especially the listed ones, have this flow-through principle, which is actually meaningless and doesn't really have any significant impact on their daily operations. When you have meaningful ownership transfer and management, that's where the change ultimately takes place.
Well, absolutely, because then what you're trying to do is to create diversity and bring new voices to the table. And
absolutely.
So you're right in the sense that if you sort of just posing, then that doesn't happen. So the true transformation doesn't happen.
And I say this all the time. As a business that is responsible for, or an industry that is responsible for communicating to the population of our country, it needs to be representative of the population of our country.
Totally.
Surely.
But our industry isn't. And
it's not, no.
And I think that is quite scary in 2021.
I agree. I think the pace of change has been slow.
It has been, unacceptably so.
Yes, but I'm excited. I'm really excited and inspired by some of the agencies that I mentioned earlier. Like yourself at Vuma, we've got Sylvester as well.
Absolutely.
So many incredible agencies that are popping up and growing and doing incredible work. And again, like I said, that's the big thing. It's like, we want to see that ultimately. We want to see that opportunity being presented.
Absolutely. And speaking of agencies popping up everywhere, we are also seeing quite an increase in new agencies. Every time I'm on Twitter, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a new PR agency, and it's some young person who's out there getting it done. And I think it's a beautiful feeling to see that and to witness that, But then I also wonder if our industry, because it's such an low threshold to entry, if that needs any kind of regulation. For example, an accountant can't just sort of decide, okay, now I'm going to be finance minister. You kind of, in South Africa, maybe that's different, but but you know what I mean.
Tito's a good guy.
No, he is, and I think he's got his papers. But the point is that in other industries, there is tough regulation to make sure that the right quality comes out of that industry. Do you think that's something that needs to happen in our case, or is it better to sort of let people be in because it's creative?
Yeah, I think, you just kind of hit the nail on the head. In law, in financial reporting and accounting, it's quite black and white, in terms of how things are presented. You have a legal system, you have a financial system. We don't have a communications system.
Yes.
And by nature, our work is creative. It's constantly changing and evolving. You know, it doesn't have 300, 400, 500 years of history behind it. And I think it's very difficult. And I think a lot of people say or argue for accreditation in our field, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
Okay.
I believe that now more than ever, we should have an opportunity for, or rather we should create an environment where people who are truly creative and maybe work better on their own or in small groups, can go out there and do that. You know, because an agency or a large agency isn't always the best place for that. And we need so many different types of people to do so much.
Collaborations.
Yeah, and collaboration is huge. What I do believe though is, like, you know, membership bodies and sort of, you know, frameworks for recognition of good work, like the PRISMs, for example, are very important, because then that shines a light on what is considered good work.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's where the issue lies, is that, you know, as you rightly pointed out, if you have 100,000 agencies, or let's say 1,000 agencies in this country, 80% of which are a single person, you know, there will be a lot of people who do bad work and give us all a bad name. But I truly believe that the cream rises to the top.
Absolutely.
And that regardless of whether you're one person or 120 people, you know, you're gonna, if you're doing good work, you're doing good work, and your reputation will be pushed forward. And we need frameworks or you know, systems like PRISA and also the PRISMs, for example, to shine a light on that. But I think it's great, you know, that we can move around and be so dynamic. It's really cool. And you see, like, a lot of influencers, for example, becoming creatives. And are they creatives or are they media people now? It's like, like, there's such a blurry line. And I actually like that. You know?
Yeah, I think it's challenging, and it almost adds a bit of flavor to what we do, because, like you say, the cream rises to the top anyway. So if you are an influencer and happen to start an agency, hey, and you do great, that's amazing. And if not, you'll learn a very tough lesson.
Yeah,
because it's not exactly an easy industry either.
Exactly. And also, I mean, accreditation suggests then, you know, that there's a massive requirement for tertiary education in order to access it.
Yeah.
You know, LLB is required to be a lawyer, for example.
Yes.
A BCom is required to go and be an accountant or articles or whatever. I mean, I didn't study this. You know, so many of the best advertising people I know never studied it. And sorry to all the graduates out there. We have lots of people working for us that have communications degree. It's good. But I don't want to exclude you know, a broad set of the population who might be excellent at this job.
Absolutely.
Just because they don't have a communications degree.
That's very true. Tom, thank you so much. That was a very interesting conversation, extremely insightful. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think it's just gems that people, you know, need to hear, and young people also need to be inspired by. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Byline, Tom Manners. Follow the rest of the series right here. So on that note, Maya Angelou once said, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. Goodbye.